Good morning, friends. Today we'll have a short introduction to Judith Wright, the Australian poet. Judith Wright was the Australian poet, environmentalist, and composer, campaigner for Aboriginal land rights. She was the recipient of the Christopher Brennan Award. She was also recipient of National Living Treasure Award in 1998. She was born on 31st May 1915 near Ermidale, New South Wales, into the family, old and wealthy pastoral family. Wright was raised on her family's sheep station. For her mother died in 1927 and she was educated under her grandmother's supervision. At the age of 14, she was sent to the New England's girls' school, where she found consolation for poetry and decided to become a poet. She was the eldest of Philip Wright and his first wife Ethel, who spent most of her formative years in Brisbane and Sydney. Wright was of a Cornish ancestry. After the early death of her mother, she lived with her aunt and then boarded in New England's girls' school, and after her father's remarriage in 1929. After graduating, Judith Wright published nearly 50 books. At the age of 85, just before her death, she attended Canberra in a march at the consolation of the Aboriginal people. In 1934, she entered at the Sydney University. Wright studied philosophy, history, psychology, and English without taking a degree. When Wright was in her 20s, she started to become a progressive deaf. Between 1937 and 38, Wright traveled in Britain and Europe. She then worked as a secretary and stenographer and a clerk in 1944. From 1944 to 48, she was a university statistician at the University of Queensland at Lucia. At the age of 30, Wright met her lifelong partner, the unorthodox philosopher J.B. McKinney, 23 years of her senior. They later married. Most of the Wright's poetry was written in the mountains of southern Queensland, protesting the political policies of Joe Bill K. Patterson, Premier of Queensland. She left her home state in mid-1970s and settled to a remote property near her heritage town of Braidwood, south of Canberra, where she wrote many of her later poems. During her career as a writer, Wright didn't desire to produce hack work, school plays for Australian Broadcasting Commission, children's books for her living. She lectured part-time at the various universities. In 1975, she collected her address and speeches in the book Because I Was Invited. She was appointed as a Foundation Fellow of Australian Academy of Humanities and an Emeritus Professor of the Literature of the Board of Art Council of Australia. Wright's memoir, Half a Lifetime, covered her life until 1960s, appeared in 2000. Wright died of a heart attack in Canberra on 26 June at the age of 85. Her ashes were scattered around the mountain cemetery of Taylor Mountain. Wright owned a strip of rainforest nearby, which she donated to state so it could be preserved in national park. Wright started to publish poems in the late 1930s in literary journals. As a poet, she made her debut in her first collection, The Moving Image, published in 1946, in which she showered her technical excellence without burdens of fashionable trends. Most of her poems were written in wartime, and in the trains Wright took the threat of war specific as a subject. The main theme in her volumes was the poet's awareness of time, death, love, and evil on a universal scale. With the following collections, Wright gained a reputation as a new voice in Australian literature with a distinctly female perspective. The title of the poem, From Woman to Man, which was published in 1949, dealt with the sexual act from the woman's point of view. The maker paralleled the creation of a poem and the creation of a child. Several of her poems, such as Walkley, Bullocky, and Man to Woman, become standard anthology pieces. Wright also wrote love poems to her husband, who died in 1966. And her increasing anxiety of destruction of natural environment brought more pessimistic undercurrents in her work. I praise the scoring drought. To quote praising Scott, the dying dust of the drying creek, a furious animal, and the oppose us still, that we are ruined by the thing we kill. This is from Australia in 1970. Wright's poetry was inspired from the various regions in which he lived: the New England, New South Wales, the subtropical rainforests of Tambourine Mountain, Queensland, and the plains of Southern Highland in Braidwood. A new period in Wright's life started in the mid 1950s. Quote, the two threads of my life, love of the land itself and the deep uneasy over the fate of its original people, were beginning to twine together. The rest of my life would be influenced by the connection. In the collection, The Two Faces, published in 1955, she took Hiroshima as an example of man's power to destroy even the cycles of nature. And about poetry, she says, poetry needs a background in which the emotional as well as material values are given to their due weight. The effect of this shallowness of roots is easily traceable in Australian writing, with its easy attempts to solve or to ignore the problem of its attitude to the country. Alienation from the land meant for Wright crisis of the language. She criticized the education system for failing to teach students the pleasures of poetry and promoted the reading and writing of poetry in schools. Realistically, she also expressed doubts about the power of poetry to change the scheme of things. In the early 1960s, Wright helped to found Wildlife Preservation Society of Queensland. She fought to conserve Great Barrier Reef when its ecology was threatened by oil drilling, and campaigned against sand mining on Fraser Island. In her passionate poem Australia 1970, Wright expressed her feelings of disappointment and anger, seeing her wild country die. Like the eagle hawk, dangerous till the last breath is gone, clawing and striking. The next collection of poems is the Coral Battleground 1977. It was an account of her campaign to protect the great water gardens, lovely indeed as the cherry boughs and flowers under once the clear sea. And the next collection, The Cry for the Dead, published in 1981, Wright examined the treatment of aborigines and destruction of the environment by settlers in Queensland from 1840s to 1920s. As a literary critic, Wright enjoyed a high reputation and edited several collections of Australian verse. She was also a friend of Aboriginal poet Ojeru Nonukal, whose work Wright helped to publish. Her book Preoccupations in Australian Poetry, published in 1965, was Wright pioneered the effort to read such early Australian poets as Harper, Adam Lindsay Garden, and Henry Kendall. Wright received several awards, including the Grace Levin Prize 1950, Britannica Award 1964, Robert Frost Memorial Award 1977, and Australian World Prize in 1984, Queen's Medal for Poetry in 1992. She had several honor degrees from several universities for her high achievement as a poet and environmentalist and social activist. Thank you.